Picture this. A newborn baby who will never see his father's face. A father so powerful that entire hospitals bend to his will. And one nurse, no title, no backup, no protection, who noticed something in 30 seconds that a room full of specialists missed for days. What she did next put her job, her safety, and everything she had ever worked for on the line. Most people would have walked away. She didn't. And because she didn't, nothing was ever the same again. Stay with me, because by the time this story ends, you're going to understand exactly what real courage looks like, and it does not look the way you expect. Before we go any further, drop a comment right now and tell me where in the world you are watching from. I want to know your city, your country, your corner of the world. And if you are new here, hit that subscribe button because this channel is where stories like this one live, true, powerful, human stories that stay with you long after you finish watching. Now, let's get into it. They say miracles don't happen in hospital hallways. They happen in operating rooms, in the hands of surgeons with decades of training and walls full of degrees. Nobody expects a miracle to start with a black nurse on a night shift, a torn page in a trash can, and a baby who couldn't see. But that's exactly what happened. And before it was over, it would cost me everything, my job, my safety, my peace of mind, before it gave me back something I didn't even know I had lost. This is my story. Every word of it is true. I was checking vitals on a newborn when I first noticed it. His name was written on the bassinet tag in neat hospital font, baby boy Shin. 3 hours old. Wrapped in a white blanket, perfectly still. I moved my penlight slowly across his field of vision the way I always did during routine checks, a habit my nursing school professor drilled into me until it became reflex. The baby didn't track it. Not sluggish. Not delayed. Nothing. His eyes were open, but they weren't following anything at all. My stomach dropped. I had seen enough newborns to know the difference between a baby who was sleepy and a baby whose eyes weren't working the way they should. I called for the attending physician immediately. Dr. Park arrived within minutes, looked the baby over, and was about to order a proper assessment when the room changed. The door opened and the air shifted the way it does when someone powerful walks in. 4 men in dark suits entered first, moving like they owned every inch of space they stepped into. Behind them came a woman in her 60s, dressed in silk, jewels catching the light, eyes scanning the room like she was looking for something to disapprove of. And behind her, a man. Tall. Sharp face. Expensive suit. He moved quietly, but everything in the room seemed to reorganize itself around him. I would later learn his name was Jean Sue. The woman, his mother, took one look at me and said loudly, in clear English, "Why is this girl touching my grandson? I want a real doctor." Now, Dr. Park blinked. He was new. Young. I could see him doing the calculation in real time, career versus ethics. He stepped gently between me and the baby. "I'll take it from here," he said quietly, without looking at me. I stood in the corner holding my penlight. I still had my observations. I still had my instincts. So I walked to the chart and I wrote everything down in careful, precise detail. Every word. Every timestamp. I went back to the nurse's station 2 hours later and the page was gone. I found it in the trash can beneath the desk, torn in half. I stood in the supply closet with the torn page in my hand and my charge nurse, Donna, pressed against the shelving unit like she was trying to disappear into it. "You need to stop," she whispered. "Right now, Maya. You don't know what you're walking into." I told her I knew exactly what I was walking into, a baby who needed a proper eye assessment. Donna shook her head slowly. She explained it in short, careful sentences, the way people explain things they are afraid of saying out loud. The Shin family had a financial arrangement with the hospital. Their own wing. their preferred doctors, their rules. The baby's father, Jin-soo, ran a criminal organization that stretched from Seoul to Los Angeles. His mother, Mrs. Shin, had been managing the family's affairs, legal and otherwise, for 30 years. And the baby's mother, a quiet woman named Soo-yeon, was barely allowed to hold her own son. Mrs. Shin controlled the feeding schedule, the nursing rotations, the lighting in the room. I asked Donna to transfer me off the case. She told me it had already been tried. I was the only qualified neonatal nurse on the overnight shift, and the family had specifically approved my clearance level before I even walked in. I was locked in. I went back to the room and watched Soo-yeon from across the space. She sat in a chair near the window, hands folded in her lap, looking at her son in the bassinet with the expression of someone who loved something they were not allowed to touch. Mrs. Shin stood near the door, directing a nurse I didn't recognize. Jin-soo was on his phone in the corner, speaking Korean in a low, flat voice. I moved to the side of the bassinet and ran another quiet check. The baby moved his head. His tiny hand opened and closed. But his eyes, open again now, found nothing. Then his body tensed. One sharp, full-body tremor. Gone in 2 seconds. A seizure. Small, brief, unmistakable. I turned to report it. Nobody else was looking at the baby. Nobody else had seen it. I reported it immediately, loudly enough that everyone in the room turned. Dr. Park came back and examined the baby for several minutes. Then he straightened up and said, in a calm professional voice, that I had misread a standard startle reflex. He said it while Mrs. Shin stood 3 feet away, watching him. He said it without making eye contact with me. I asked for a second opinion, and he said it wasn't necessary. I asked who had authorized the removal of my chart entry, and he said he had no knowledge of any chart entry being removed. Mrs. Shin smiled at me. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who had done this many times before and knew exactly how it ended. Jin-soo was still in the corner. He hadn't moved. But I noticed his eyes had shifted from his phone to me. He was watching in a way that felt different from his mother's watching. She was dismissing me. He was reading me. Like he was trying to figure out what kind of person I was. Soo-yeon caught my eye from across the room, and I saw something pass through her face. Not surprise. Not relief. Something more fragile than both. Recognition. Like she had been waiting for someone to notice and had almost stopped believing anyone would. She mouthed something. 2 words. I read her lips carefully. I saw. I held her gaze for just a second before Mrs. Shin's voice cut across the room asking where the baby's feeding chart was. I went home after my shift and sat in my car in the parking garage for 20 minutes without starting the engine. I thought about my brother Marcus. He was 22 now, and the vision in his left eye was permanently limited because an ER doctor had written off his symptoms twice before anyone looked properly. I became a nurse because of Marcus. I specialized in pediatric care because I knew what it cost a child when adults stopped paying attention. I was not going to stop paying attention. I drove home. When I came back the next evening, Soo-yeon had a bruise on her wrist that hadn't been there before. I noticed the bruise during routine vitals. It was the kind that wraps around fingers. I kept my face completely still and my hands steady because Mrs. Shin was in the room. I finished my checks and waited. 30 minutes later, Soo-yeon asked for water and Mrs. Shin sent the other nurse to fetch it, leaving a brief window. I moved. I asked Soo-yeon quietly whether she was safe. She looked at me with eyes that had learned how to stay very still. She didn't answer the question. But she reached into the pocket of her robe and pressed a folded piece of paper into my palm. Then she looked away, and I walked out of the room like nothing had happened. In the hallway bathroom, I unfolded it. The handwriting was small and shaking. The baby was dropped 2 days before labor. She said he slipped. He didn't slip. I read it 3 times. My heart was hammering. If the baby hadn't been born with a vision impairment, if it had been caused by trauma shortly before birth, then everything changed. Traumatic optic injury in a newborn could present exactly the way baby Shin's symptoms presented. And unlike congenital blindness, traumatic damage caught early enough could sometimes be treated. The window for that treatment was small. Dangerously small. I folded the note back up and put it in the inside pocket of my scrub top. I walked back to the nurse's station and tried to look like I was doing paperwork. I was actually doing math. How old was the baby? How many hours since birth? How many hours the window stayed open? How many hours I had to find someone who could help before the choice got made for all of us? I heard footsteps behind me. Slow. Deliberate. I turned around. Mrs. Shin was standing in the doorway of the room, looking at me. She had the careful expression of someone who had just seen everything and was now deciding what to do about it. The written complaint landed on the hospital administrator's desk before my shift ended. I was called in the next morning to meet with Mr. Yoon, the administrator, a man who had the permanent expression of someone trying to keep a very heavy object balanced. He didn't look at me directly. He informed me that a formal complaint had been filed regarding unprofessional conduct and patient family harassment. He told me one more complaint meant termination. He handed me a copy of the write-up and asked me to sign that I had received it. I signed. I walked out. In the hallway, I passed Jin-soo. He was alone, no bodyguards within earshot for once, just him moving through the corridor with that quiet, contained way he had. He stopped when he saw me. I stopped. We stood about 6 feet apart in a hospital hallway at 8 in the morning, and I felt the full weight of everything between us. The danger, the note in my pocket, his son in that room, the page torn out of the chart. You wrote that entry, he said. His voice was low. Even. Not a question. Yes, I said. He looked at me for a moment. Then he nodded once, slowly, and walked past me without another word. No threat. No dismissal. Just that nod, which somehow felt more complicated than either of those things would have been. I finished my paperwork and took the elevator to the parking garage. My car was on level 3, space 14. I found it on level 2, space 9. I stood and stared at it for a long time. I was the only person who had been in that garage. I was the only one with my keys. And yet my car had moved. I called my mother that night from my apartment floor. Not the couch. The floor, because sometimes when things get too big, you need to be as close to the ground as possible. Her name is Delia, and she has a voice like warm bread, and she has never once in my life told me something was going to be easy when it wasn't. I told her everything from the beginning. She listened without interrupting, which meant she was scared. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Maya, baby, you have your whole career in front of you. Walk away." I understood why she said it. I was 29 years old. I had a nursing degree I had earned on a scholarship, student loans I was still paying, and a job that paid just enough to cover rent and groceries with very little left over. I had been passed over for charge nurse twice. Both times the position went to someone less experienced, but better connected. I had spent 6 years at that hospital being quietly excellent and quietly overlooked. And now I was being threatened over chart entries and car movements and a complaint filed by a family whose name made administrators go pale. My mother was right. Walking away was the smart choice. I looked at the note Soo-yeon had pressed into my hand. I thought about the baby in that bassinet, eyes open, seeing nothing. I thought about Marcus at 18 months old, reaching for colors he could barely make out. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered it anyway. The voice on the other end was male. Young. Speaking in accented English. Korean accent. My name is Dae, he said. Jin-soo is my brother. I need you to meet me tomorrow. Alone. I have something you need to see. I met Dae at a diner in Koreatown the next morning. He was nothing like his brother. Where Jin-soo was composed and expensive, Dae looked like someone who had deliberately walked away from all of that: worn jacket, cheap sneakers, a carry-out coffee cup with a gas station logo. He was maybe 26. He slid a folder across the table before I even sat down properly. Inside were medical records. Baby Shin's real prenatal records, including an incident report from 2 weeks before the birth that had never been officially filed. There was also a second set of documents, 2 previous cases. 2 other doctors who had raised concerns about the Shin family's medical management. One had left Cedars-Sinai quietly after a license complaint. The other had relocated to another state entirely and no longer practiced medicine. They told me what was happening in short, direct sentences. Mrs. Shin planned to file for full custody of the baby on grounds of maternal negligence. She was going to argue that Soo-yeon had caused the baby's condition. The filing was already drafted. It was set to happen in 4 days. The goal was to remove Soo-yeon from her son's life completely and raise the baby under Mrs. Shin's control. This was not new behavior. This was a plan she had been building since the pregnancy. I asked Dae why he was telling me this. He looked at his coffee cup. Because my brother reads people, he said. He told me last night that the nurse on the 3rd floor was the first honest person to walk into that room since Soo-yeon gave birth. He doesn't say things like that. His phone lit up on the table between us. Jin-soo's name on the screen. Dae looked at me. He knows we're here, he said quietly. Jin-soo walked through the diner door 3 minutes later. Dae stood up so fast his chair scraped and was gone through the back exit before his brother reached our table. Jin-soo watched him go without expression. Then he sat down across from me. He didn't call anyone over. Didn't look around. He ordered coffee from the passing waitress without looking at the menu, and then he was quiet for what felt like a very long time. My son can't see me, he said finally. Not anger. Not a statement of fact for my benefit. It was the sound of someone saying out loud something they had been carrying alone. He told me about the moment he held his son for the first time. He described moving his hand slowly back and forth in front of the baby's face. He told me he went home that night and sat in his kitchen for a long time. He said his mother told him to accept it. That some children were born this way and the family would manage. He said the word accept like it tasted bad. Then he told me he had found a copy of my chart entry. He didn't say how. He said something in it had stayed with him and he couldn't let it go. Tell me what you think is wrong with my son, he said. I told him everything. The tracking failure. The seizure. Soo-yeon's note. The distinction between a condition someone is born with and damage caused by force. I told him about the treatment window, the narrow, closing gap during which trauma-induced vision loss in a newborn could still be addressed. He listened to every word without moving. How long, he asked. I told him. 72 hours from that moment. Maybe less. His jaw tightened like a door being locked. His phone rang. His mother's name on the screen. He turned it face down on the table and left it there. Jin-soo wanted to move immediately, call specialists, override his mother, use every resource available to him. I told him to stop. I explained carefully that if he pushed through his own channels, the examination would be controlled by Dr. Park, who would find nothing and document nothing, and the treatment window would close while we were still arguing about jurisdiction. We needed someone outside the system. Someone Mrs. Shin couldn't reach. I thought of one person. Her name was Dr. Carol Webb. She was 61 years old, based in Atlanta, trained at Johns Hopkins, and she had spent 30 years doing what most pediatric ophthalmologists considered impossible. She had been my professor in nursing school and the sharpest mind I had ever been in the same room with. She had retired from institutional medicine 2 years ago and now took private cases, only the ones she believed in. I called her from the parking lot at 11 that night. She answered on the second ring. I told her everything. She asked 3 questions, precise and fast, the way someone asks when they already understand 90% of what you are telling them and just need the remaining pieces. Then she said, "Get me on a plane. I'll be in Los Angeles by 4 in the morning." I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. Then my phone buzzed. A notification from the state nursing board. An emergency complaint had been filed against my license. While I had been on the phone with Dr. Webb, someone had filed a formal accusation of record falsification and practicing outside my license scope. The complaint cited 3 specific incidents, all from the past 48 hours, all described in ways that made me sound reckless and dishonest. Dr. Park's name was in the filing. The letter said I had 72 hours to respond before automatic suspension proceedings began. I sat at my kitchen table and read it 4 times. My hands were very still. My mind was the opposite of still. I thought about everything Day had told me, about the doctors who had raised concerns before me and where they had ended up. One left the state. One stopped practicing medicine. Now here I was, license complaint filed, car moved in a parking lot, written up at work, 48 hours into knowing a baby's name and already standing at the edge of everything I had built. My mother's voice came back to me. Walk away. I opened my laptop instead. I started documenting every single thing, from the moment I picked up the penlight on my first night with the baby. Every observation, every timestamp, every person in the room, every word I remembered being said. I wrote down the chart entry that was torn out and what it contained. I wrote down the seizure, the time, the duration, who was present. I wrote down the conversation in the supply closet with Donna. I wrote down the complaint meeting with Mr. Yoon. I wrote down the car. I wrote down Suyun's bruise and the note she gave me. I wrote for 4 hours. My eyes burned. My coffee went cold twice, and I reheated it twice and forgot to drink it both times. At 3 in the morning, with the document 31 pages long, I attached it to an email addressed to the State Medical Board, the State Nursing Board, and a healthcare oversight organization I had researched 2 years ago after reading an article about private hospital financial arrangements. I hit send. Then my phone rang. It was Dr. Webb calling from the airport. I'm boarding, she said. Tell me you haven't quit. I haven't quit, I said. Good. Because if what you described is accurate, that baby can see by Thursday. There was a pause. Then her voice dropped slightly. Maya, someone has been in your apartment. Go somewhere else tonight. I looked across the kitchen. The drawer beside the stove was open. I always kept it closed. Nothing was missing. I checked everything twice. But the drawer was open and I knew I hadn't opened it, and that single fact was louder than anything else in that apartment. I called the police. 2 officers came and took a report with the energy of people filling out paperwork they believed would accomplish nothing. They left at 1 in the morning. I stood in my hallway for a moment, and then I called Jin-soo. He answered immediately. I told him what I had found. He was quiet for 3 seconds. Then he said, "Don't stay there tonight." A car arrived outside my building 12 minutes later. The room was already booked at a hotel across the city, paid for by someone I would have called my enemy 4 days ago. I packed a bag and left. I lay on top of the hotel covers, fully dressed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what my life had become in the past 4 days. 4 days ago, I was a night shift nurse with student loan payments and a drawer full of protein bar wrappers. Now I was in a hotel paid for by a man who ran a criminal organization because I had noticed a baby's eyes weren't tracking light. My whole world had turned upside down. The Mafia boss was protecting me. The hospital was hunting me. The mother of the child was a prisoner. The grandmother was the architect of everything wrong in that family. And somewhere in a private room at Cedars-Sinai, a baby boy was running out of time to see his father's face. I opened my laptop and kept working. At 2:30 in the morning, a text came through from a number I didn't have saved. The message was 6 words: "She's moving him tonight. Private facility." The text was from Soo-yeon. She had gotten access to a phone somehow and used it for those 6 words before it went silent again. Mrs. Shin had arranged a transfer. Baby Shin moved to a private clinic in Pasadena where Dr. Park had full authority and no external oversight. The transfer was set for 6 in the morning. Dr. Webb was landing at 4. I had 2 hours. I called Jin-soo and spoke fast. He was the baby's father. Equal legal guardian. He had the authority to stop the transfer if he acted before 6. He listened without interrupting, and then he said he would meet me at the hospital at 4:30. I arrived at 4:20. The hospital at that hour was the quietest version of itself. Fewer staff, slower pace, the particular stillness of a building that hasn't fully woken up yet. I waited near the parking entrance. Dr. Webb arrived at 4:40, carry-on bag over one shoulder, moving with the focused energy of someone who hadn't slept and didn't need to. I gave her the full picture in 4 minutes. She listened the way she always had, completely, processing everything at once. Then she nodded once and said, "Take me to the baby." Jin-soo arrived at 4:55. We stood together near the elevator, the 3 of us. I watched him take in Dr. Webb, her credentials, her composure, the way she held herself like someone who had already decided the outcome. He looked at me. I looked back. Then the elevator opened and Mrs. Shin stepped out, fully dressed, jewels on, eyes moving across the 3 of us like a scan completing. She had come early. She had been expecting this. Mrs. Shin spoke in Korean first, fast and sharp, directed at her son. Jin-soo responded in English deliberately, so I would understand everything. She switched to English too after a moment, and the words she aimed at me were designed to sting: opportunist, manipulative, reckless, a woman using a sick baby to build a reputation. I kept my face still. Jin-soo let her talk. He stood with his arms at his sides and listened to his mother the way someone listens to whether they have learned to wait out. Then she made the mistake. She said the baby had been born broken. That some children came into the world that way. That it was time to stop pretending otherwise and focus on what was realistic. Broken. The word landed in the space between all of us. Jin-soo went very still in a way that was different from his usual stillness. He said quietly, "You said that about Soo-yeon when I married her." Mrs. Shin's expression shifted. "That's not, you told me she was the wrong kind of person. Not strong enough. Not right for this family." He paused. "You have been saying that about everyone I have chosen for 30 years. She tried to speak. He held up one hand and she stopped. Something in him had changed in the past week that she hadn't measured for. She was still working with a version of her son that flinched. He wasn't flinching anymore. He took his phone and called his lawyer, short and specific. "Stop the transfer. File an immediate injunction. Fax confirmation to the hospital administrator before 6. Mrs. Shin watched him. When he hung up, she looked at me with eyes so cold they almost had texture. "This isn't over," she said. She was right. But the direction it was moving in had completely changed. Dr. Webb examined the baby for 40 minutes while I stood guard outside the room door. When she came out, her face was the particular neutral of someone holding something enormous very carefully. She asked Jin-soo to sit. She told him in clear, plain language. His son did not have congenital blindness. He had bilateral traumatic optic neuropathy with secondary retinal inflammation caused by blunt force impact occurring shortly before birth. The condition was not genetic. It was not permanent. It was treatable. If treatment began that day, there was a 78% probability of meaningful vision restoration. Jin-soo's face did not move for several seconds. Then something in it shifted, not dramatically, not loudly, but the way ice shifts before it breaks. "When do we start?" he asked. Dr. Webb opened her mouth to respond. Behind me, footsteps. Dr. Park was walking toward us, badge visible, voice already prepared. "Dr. Webb," he said evenly. "You don't have admitting privileges at this hospital." Dr. Webb looked at Dr. Park the way a mountain looks at weather. She reached into her carry-on bag and took out her phone. She made 2 calls. The first was to the chief of pediatric neurology at Johns Hopkins, a man who had trained under her and whose voice I could hear through the phone saying, "Carol, whatever you need," before she had finished explaining. The second call was to a journalist named David Reese who had been investigating private hospital financial arrangements for 8 months and had been waiting for exactly the right case to anchor his story. She did not threaten. She stated facts. She described the situation in 1 paragraph with the precision of a surgeon making an incision. When she hung up, she looked at Dr. Park again. He had not moved, but he looked smaller. Jin-soo stepped forward. He spoke to Dr. Park for 45 seconds in a low, even tone. Dr. Park left. By 9 that morning, Dr. Webb had temporary admitting privileges. By 9:15, Dr. Park had called the hospital to report a sudden illness. By 9:20, I was standing in the hallway outside the treatment room watching Dr. Webb begin setting up. Then Jin-soo's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and his expression changed. "The custody hearing," he said. "My mother's lawyer moved it up. It starts in 2 hours." I couldn't be in 2 places at once. The baby needed me at the hospital during treatment preparation. But Soo-yeon had no lawyer and no warning. She had woken up that morning to a text informing her that a family court hearing was beginning at 11. Mrs. Shin's legal team had been preparing for months. Then Dae walked through the hospital's front entrance carrying a laptop bag. He had heard about the hearing the same way he seemed to hear about everything. He sat down next to his brother and opened the bag. Inside was a recorder. He had been recording for 4 months. Conversations between Mrs. Shin and Dr. Park about which findings to report and which to suppress. Discussions about the custody plan. He gave everything to the emergency public defender assigned to Soo-yeon, who listened to 40 seconds of audio and immediately requested a judicial delay for evidence review. In the treatment room, Dr. Webb began the first phase of the protocol. In the courthouse across the city, a judge pressed stop on a recording and asked to hear it from the beginning. Mrs. Shin's lawyer requested a recess. The judge denied it. My phone buzzed. Dae's message, "Judge is asking for a full investigation." Then 1 minute later, Jin-soo's men are outside my apartment. I found Jin-soo in the hallway and told him about Dae's message. He was already on the phone. By the time he hung up, whatever had been sent to Dae's apartment had been redirected. But the damage between the brothers was already sitting in the air between them when Dae arrived at the hospital 20 minutes later. Jin-soo's jaw was tight. He said Dae had gone around him, had exposed the family without warning, had made choices that affected all of them without a conversation. Dae stood still and let his brother talk, the way someone stands in rain they knew was coming. When Jin-soo finished, Dae said simply, She was going to take your son. The hallway was very quiet. I was standing between them without having planned to be. I thought about stepping back and decided against it. Your mother has been taking from both of you your whole lives, I said. Day didn't break your family. She did. He just stopped letting her. Jin-soo looked at me. Then he looked at the floor. His shoulders dropped about half an inch, which on him was the equivalent of another man sitting down and putting his head in his hands. My father used to say she loved us like a closed fist, he said. Tight. Always squeezing. He sat down in one of the plastic hallway chairs. Day sat next to him. Neither of them spoke for a while. There was something raw in the space between them, not healed, not resolved, but open in a way it hadn't been for years. Then the treatment room door opened. Dr. Webb stepped out and her eyes were bright in a way that made my heart rate jump. She said the first phase had gone as well as it possibly could. The baby's response to the initial medication was positive, but 12 hours needed to pass before they would know more. We waited. At some point in the early afternoon, Soo-yeon arrived from the courthouse, still in the clothes she had worn that morning, eyes red but her spine straight. The public defender had called to tell her that the emergency custody order was suspended and her parental rights were temporarily fully restored. She walked past everyone and went directly to the observation window of the treatment room. She put both palms flat on the glass and looked at her son. Jin-soo stood and walked to the window. He stood next to her. Their reflections overlapped in the glass, both looking at the same small person in the room beyond. Soo-yeon spoke first. I tried to tell you. About your mother. About what happened before he was born. I know, Jin-soo said quietly. I didn't listen the way I should have. She turned to look at him. You did listen. You just weren't ready to believe how far she would go. He nodded. Something between them was broken, definitely. But something else was also carefully beginning. Then footsteps behind me. A hospital security guard. Nurse Johnson? There's a woman from the state nursing board at the front desk. She's asking for you specifically. Her name was Ms. Okafor, and she was exactly the kind of calm that takes years to build. She was 40-something, natural hair pulled back neatly, reading glasses on a chain around her neck. She had a file folder on the table between us in the small conference room, and she set it down without opening it immediately, which told me she wasn't here to suspend me on the spot. She told me she had the formal complaint, Dr. Park's statement, and the administrator's report. She had reviewed all three. Then she opened a second folder. 11 complaints over 6 years. All filed against Dr. Park. All from nurses. Every single one dismissed. All of them involved wealthy private patients. She looked at me over her glasses. You sent a documentation package to the state medical board at 3:17 in the morning 2 days ago. I told her that was correct. 31 pages. I confirmed it. Time-stamped observations, witness names, a reconstructed chart entry, documented evidence of the original entry's removal, a description of suspicious activity. She paused. Miss Johnson, in 15 years of investigations, I have rarely seen a floor nurse document a situation this completely. You essentially handed us everything we needed. She slid one more paper across the table. Dr. Park had resigned that morning, effective immediately, and named the hospital administrator in a counter-complaint to reduce his own exposure. By evening, the news was spreading through the hospital. 3 names from the Shin family's paid specialist network had been formally referred to the medical board. The family court judge had issued a written rebuke of Mrs. Shin's legal team. And David Reese published his article at 4 in the afternoon, careful, thorough, devastating. It described how private financial arrangements between wealthy families and hospital systems created environments where accurate diagnosis was suppressed in favor of long-term revenue. Cedars-Sinai was named. Dr. Park was named. 7 other families whose children had received delayed or incorrect diagnoses were identified. The hospital board issued a statement before 6 announcing an independent audit of all private patient financial protocols. I read the article on my phone in the hospital cafeteria. I felt no triumph. What I felt was something quieter, the deep settling exhale of someone who has been holding something very heavy for days and can finally, carefully, put it down. I thought about the other 6 families, about what they were reading right now, about what it meant to finally have someone tell the truth about what had happened to their children. I was still thinking about them when Dr. Webb appeared in the cafeteria doorway. She was smiling. "He's responding." She said it simply, and I was on my feet before she finished the sentence. We walked to the observation window together. Soo-yeon was already inside the room, holding the baby, and Dr. Webb stood beside the bassinet with a small penlight in her hand. The same kind I had used 4 nights ago on a night shift when everything started. She moved the light slowly across the baby's field of vision. He was awake, eyes open, small face calm. The light moved right. His eyes moved right. Slowly. Imperfectly. But tracking it. Following it. Seeing it. Soo-yeon made a sound that was not a word. Her hand pressed over her mouth. She was shaking. Dr. Webb stepped back and spoke without looking up from the baby. "Full assessment will take weeks. There is more work ahead. But what I am observing right now indicates a high probability of meaningful, functional vision restoration." She paused for one breath. "He will most likely see." I turned to look at Jin-soo beside me. He was staring through the glass at his son with the expression of someone watching something they had stopped believing in become real. His jaw was working. His eyes were full. He put his hand over his mouth the same way Soo-yeon had. His shoulders rose once and fell, a single wave of something years deep finally breaking the surface. He turned to look at me. I don't have words for what was in his face in that moment. It was too much of too many things at once, grief and relief and rage at all the lost time and gratitude that was too large for any hallway to hold. I was crying too, I realized. I hadn't noticed when it started. Behind us, a nurse appeared. Her voice was careful. "Mr. Shin, your mother is downstairs in the lobby." Jin-soo rode the elevator down alone. I watched the doors close. 15 minutes passed. When the doors opened again and he walked back into the hallway, he looked different in a way I couldn't immediately name. Then I understood. He looked lighter. Not happy. Not relieved. Just lighter, the way people look when they have put down something they have been carrying so long they forgot it was there. He told me his mother had been standing in the lobby without her usual armor. Just herself. He said she had looked, for the first time he could remember, old. He had stood in front of her and said everything he should have said for 30 years. She tried to interrupt twice. Both times he held up one hand and she stopped. He told her what she had done to Soo-yeon, to the baby, today to him. He told her what it had cost all of them. Then she said one sentence, "I only ever wanted to protect you." He told her that protection with no oxygen was not love. It was control wearing love's clothing. She would not be erased from the family. But she would no longer be at the center of it. That center belonged to Soo-yeon and to his son. She cried, he said quietly. "I think it was real." He paused. "I don't know if it changes anything. But it was real." The weeks that followed moved like water finding its level slowly, steadily, filling in spaces that had been empty too long. The family court formalized Soo-yeon's full custody with a legal structure that was specific and ironclad. Mrs. Shin was granted supervised visits, structured, scheduled, entirely at Soo-yeon's discretion. Not exile. Not forgiveness. A door left open a crack that she would have to earn the right to walk through. Dr. Park faced a full medical board review alongside 2 other attending physicians. The hospital's independent audit identified 9 additional cases where private patient arrangements had influenced clinical decisions. 7 families were quietly contacted. The Cedars-Sinai board replaced the administrator and commissioned a comprehensive review of their private patient protocols. None of it was perfect. None of it erased the time that had been lost. But systems that had been operating in shadow were now being examined in full light, and that mattered. Then I was called into the new interim administrator's office. Her name was Dr. Grace Ndiaye, and she had clearly read every document in my file before I sat down. She told me I was reinstated effective immediately with full back pay. She placed a written formal apology from the hospital on the desk in front of me, signed, entered permanently into my employment record. I accepted it. Then she offered me a new position. Pediatric Patient Advocacy Coordinator, a role created specifically to ensure that what had happened to baby Shin had a named human being standing between institutional convenience and patient welfare. Real authority. Real salary. A seat at every table where clinical decisions involving pediatric patients were made. She gave me 24 hours to decide. I left the office and went outside and called my mother. She answered before the second ring. I told her everything, start to finish, the whole week. She cried twice. When I finished, she said, "You remember what I always told you about Marcus? That God put that in your path so you'd know what to look for." I looked at a photo on my phone, Marcus, 22 years old, laughing at something off camera, partial sight in one eye, the widest smile I had ever seen. "Tell him I said hi," I told her softly. I accepted the position the next morning. When I walked out of the building, Jin-soo was leaning against a car in the parking lot. Not the armored one. A regular car. He was waiting for me. He looked different in regular clothes. Like a person instead of a position. He had his hands in his pockets, and he was squinting slightly in the morning sun, and for the first time since I had met him he looked like someone who was not managing a situation. Just standing there. He told me he was stepping back from the organization. Not immediately, not all at once. It was complicated and would take time, and he was not pretending otherwise. But he had a son who was going to be able to see him. He wanted to be someone worth seeing. He said, "I grew up believing that strength meant never needing anyone. Never asking. Never being visible enough for anyone to hurt." A pause. You walked into a room where every signal said walk away. You had a scared kid behind you and a written warning against you and a car that had been moved. And you stayed. I told him I wasn't being brave. I told him I just couldn't unknow what I knew. That was the truth and nothing else. He nodded like that made complete sense to him. Then he held out an envelope. I opened it. Inside was a letter to my nursing school's scholarship foundation, a significant donation, anonymous, dedicated in the name of Staff Sergeant Marcus Gregory. My husband, who I had mentioned once, briefly, in a hospital waiting room in the middle of the night. Who Jin-soo had apparently remembered. I looked at the letter. Looked away at the parking lot. Looked back. My eyes were burning. I told him he didn't have to do that. No, he said simply. I didn't. We stood there for a moment in the ordinary morning light, not allies. Not enemies, just 2 people changed by the same small boy who had opened his eyes and found the world. I pressed the envelope against my chest. Then I turned and walked back into that hospital, badge on, head up, to do the work I had always been meant to do. And upstairs, in a room full of quiet morning sun, a baby boy named Shin stretched his small arms wide and turned his face toward the window. He was looking at the light. He could see it. He could finally, truly see it. If this story moved something in you, if Amara's courage reminded you of someone real, someone who showed up for you when it was hard and scary and the easiest thing in the world would have been to look away, I want to hear from you. Drop a comment right now. Tell me your name. Tell me your city. Tell me where in the world you are watching from. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do it right now. Every subscriber tells me this channel is worth continuing. There are more stories like this one waiting to be told, stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things in the moments that matter most. Stories that will sit with you long after you finish watching. Don't miss a single one. Hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and I will see you in the next story.